Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 214 of the Tick Bootcamp podcast. The title of today's interview is Mompreneur, an interview with Masha Goins. My name is Richard Johannesson.
And I'm Matt Sabatello.
Matt, this is a really cool woman with a really cool background. She's Oxford educated and began her career in the not-for-profit sector, conflict resolution in war-torn countries. She then went to work for Amazon, specifically Audible, working in big business. And then she actually turned her talents after dealing with years of Lyme disease and becoming a mom to become an Instagram coach in the entrepreneurial sector.
Rich, Masha was sick for so long. She had to find ways to numb her symptoms. And she told us when she finally stopped doing that and became healthy, she realized how sick she really was. She had to become her own detective for Lyme disease. And once she was diagnosed, she had to learn to get what she could out of one doctor and then move on either through research or another doctor to get what she needed next. Today, Masha's feeling much better and is raising a healthy family and is living a happy life.
So Matt, this is a woman who grew up in the Lyme belt. She was bitten by ticks many, many times, and she had a health journey which was sort of up and down based on how stressful her life was. And thankfully, she's been able to bring her life to a place where she can have some peace. She can live a less stressful life. She can be a good mom, and she can also be a mompreneur. So Matt, without further ado, I'm really excited to introduce to the Tick Bootcamp community, Mompreneur with Masha Goins. Hey, Masha, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
We're really excited to have you too. So Masha, talk to us a little bit about your life. I understand you're living with your family in the birthplace or the state birthplace of Lyme disease.
That's right. We live in a tree house pretty much in the forest in Tick Central, Connecticut. And we moved here from New York City about 7 years ago. And before I moved here, I had spent my teen years in Westchester County, New York. So I was familiar with ticks and, in the 90s was bitten by ticks all the time at school. It was just part of where we lived. Nobody thought about it. Nobody talked about Lyme or anything like that. You'd sit in class and find like a tick on your head. You just go to the nurse, she'd remove it and move along, right? That's pretty much that. But yes, now we live in Fairfield County, Connecticut, in a little town surrounded by trees. And and I'll tell you more about my Lyme story in a minute, but that's
so let's talk about your journey though. So where did your life's journey begin? I understand you're not a native of the US.
Well, that's right. I was born in Tokyo, Japan, and my dad is American and my mom is Russian. So I'm a love product of the Cold War. They fell in love during the Cold War in the 70s and got together against all odds, even though, my dad's family disinherited him for marrying a communist. And, when she came here, she had no concept of, Western society. It was just, it was crazy. Anyway, so we then moved to Japan because of my dad's job. And I lived in Japan and then moved to Germany and was in German school systems all my life.
So talk to us about your educational experience, first in Japan and then later in Germany. Did any of that educational experience include any information about ticks or tick diseases?
No, nothing. I mean, it was just, this in the 80s and 90s, and I'm dating myself now, but it was just not really something it was not known. So you knew that there were ticks, there were mosquitoes, whatever, but it wasn't something that I ever heard about when I was growing up. And when I was 19, I got very ill, actually, and I was going to go on holiday with my friends in Spain, and I was determined. I got really sick, but I thought, this is just, I just have some kind of virus, it'll get better. It got to the point where I couldn't move my neck, and I couldn't actually, once I got to Spain, I couldn't get out of bed. I could barely walk. And
So Masha, let me ask you to pause there for a second, because I'm just looking for a timeline of your life. So you were born in Japan, your early education was in Germany. Where did you complete your middle school and high school education? Were you still in Germany? Did you come to the US? When were you I guess, when did you immigrate to the US or come to the US?
Yeah, so that's the US is where when it all went pear-shaped. So I was in the US when I got to the US when I was 10, and lived in Westchester from 10 until 18, 19.
Okay, pause there for a second, because I want to talk to you about your life between the ages of 10 and 18 or 19, where you first started to get sick. So you're now going to school in Westchester, and you shared with us a little bit earlier that you recall having been bitten by ticks and going to the nurse and having the nurse remove ticks. So talk about how many times that happened between the ages of 10 and 18, not just going to the nurse, but how many times you remember being bitten by ticks?
Yeah, I mean, multiple times. It was just a regular occurrence. I remember, sitting in class and feeling like, a disgustingly engorged tick on my scalp, and then being like, oh, I have to go to the nurse, and then the nurse would remove it, and okay, you can come back to class. And nobody thought anything. There wasn't any like, okay, we have to get the tick tested, or maybe you need to go on some antibiotics or anything like that, right? I never had a bullseye or anything. So there was no sort of monitoring or connection between getting bitten by ticks and the health issues that I started to experience once I was a teen.
Okay, so let's again now talk about your educational experience here in the US between 10 and 18. Was there any education given to you either in school or in a social setting about checking for ticks and removing ticks and any diseases you could get from tick bites?
I mean, possibly the nurse talked about it, but it went in one ear and out the other. It was not something that was at the forefront of my mind at all. And you just knew that if you found a tick, it had to be removed. But it wasn't like, oh, the raccoons have rabies and you can't get bitten by a raccoon. It was, there was this whole rabies scare in the 90s. It just didn't seem like a threat, the whole ticks in general. And we lived in the suburbs in White Plains, New York. And, it was just tick central pretty much.
So now, was there any information about people getting ill from tick bites available to you in that window of time in the 90s between when you arrived to the US when you were 10 and before you had gotten sick when you were 19 or 18?
No, I didn't hear about Lyme disease. I didn't become aware of Lyme disease until I was in my 30s and started hearing about it from some, holistic health practitioners. So I was just it wasn't even something that was at the forefront of my mind at all.
Now, do you recall suffering from any illnesses before you had this sort of threshold or notable illness when you were 18 or 19? Before that, do you recall receiving any illnesses, or do you feel sick between the ages of 10 and 18?
Yeah, I got mononucleosis when I was 16. So that was like my the first time that I was really ill. And I remember, just kind of being in bed for a long time and not being able to function properly and missing out on school, which of course I thought was fabulous at the time. I just stay in bed and read books. But yeah, I think that, and then the interesting thing is that the Epstein, Barr virus, that's something that I also, it stays in your system and just lays dormant, I guess. But yeah, so I had mono, and then once you have it, it never goes away. And apparently, I think 95% of the population are infected with it. So
now, looking back at that experience with mono, do you believe that it was a tick disease that reduced your immune system and caused the mono challenge that you had faced and caused you to spend a lot of time out of school? Or do you believe that perhaps mono is what caused you to have an immune disruption, which ultimately caused you to get sicker when you had your crash when you were 18 or 19?
Yeah, I think the mono probably came first. I mean, I had really classic mono symptoms. And then it's only recently in this last year that I have realized that what happened to me when I was 19, I guess I was 19, must have been tick related. And because it was a big mystery, I was, my mom, I ended up in a wheelchair in Spain. My mom had to come and get me on a plane in a wheelchair and take me to the hospital in New York. And they had no idea what was going on. And of course, they ended up saying that it might have been viral meningitis, but there was no diagnosis that was actually, created. So it was a big question mark.
Okay, so let's pause there for a second. I want to talk to you a little bit more about your childhood and what your goals and dreams were during your childhood. So you spent about 10 years of your life in Europe. You then came to the US. What kinds of things were you dreaming about, and what kinds of things were you working towards all the way up to going to college?
Well, my goal was to go to college as far away from home as possible. That was my big goal. And I did really well in school. I was always a really good student and was lucky that I didn't have to study very hard to make good grades. And so I applied to the University of Oxford because I had, in addition to the US high school diploma, the German school system had like an extra year of schooling, which just sounds like torture, like a 13th year of high school. And so I was able to apply directly as an undergraduate to the UK, which most US students are not able to do. So that was my goal, was to go to the UK, have a lot of fun, and just experience freedom and college life. That was, and that's what happened. And I, managed to do it with myself without any tutors or, I don't know, anyone paying to write my college essay or whatever they do nowadays.
They didn't have any fiber back then to find people to buy your essays.
Yeah, it was like, I didn't even have a college counselor, and I refused. My dad went to Harvard, so I was trying to rebel, and I refused to take my SATs so that I couldn't even study at a US university. So that was my big acting out as a teenager.
So what was your major when you went to Oxford?
So I studied modern languages and focused on Russian and German literature.
And then after you graduated from Oxford, what'd you do?
After I graduated from Oxford, I became very political during the Balkan Wars were happening at the time, and I, started becoming more political about what was happening and interested in, the whole concept of conflict and conflict resolution. So then I wanted to do a master's at the London School of Economics, focused on international relations, which is what I did. And I started working in London at a nonprofit on conflict resolution and peace building issues.
So talk to us about where that took you. What kind of work did you do? Were you in the for-profit or not-for-profit community, and what kind of work were you doing after you graduated from the London School?
Yeah, so I was working for a nonprofit, and I remember actually it was my first paid job that I got, and there was no job opening or anything. I basically was determined to work for a specific person who was doing really interesting work on gender and conflict and gender and security issues. And so I just, basically offered myself as a free volunteer, as an intern, and pestered her until she, agreed to let me work for free for over 6 months, which again, now I think interns are all paid, etc. So I worked for free for a long time. And then finally they offered me a job, and that's when I started working. And what I did was I put together teams and missions to go to conflict and post-conflict areas around the world. And I worked with policymakers at member state government level and UN and the UN Security Council to basically bridge the divide between the reality of, what was happening, say, in Liberia and what the UN was doing about it, how they were helping. So that was really interesting work, and I was very passionate about it.
So let's round out this portion of our conversation about your career. So where did you go after you finished doing the not-for-profit work in conflict resolution?
Okay, so then I got typhoid when I was in West Africa, and that was, one of those moments where I'm like, you know what, this is, I think I need a career change here. It was just, I think I was hallucinating at one point, and I called my dad, and he said, what are you doing in that hellhole? And you need to get out of here and come back to New York and get a real job. And it really, I'm lucky that I got antibiotics, because I got really sick, and it was not a good experience. It was not a good experience, but yeah, antibiotics saved my life for sure. And I was yellow for about 2 months, like literally my skin turned yellow. And yeah, then I decided, you know what, I'm going to make a career change. I'm going back to New York, and I'm going to see about working in media. And that's how I ended up working for Amazon and Audible, and specifically.
So what do you do at Audible?
I worked in business development and content acquisition. So I negotiated the deals with agents and publishers and authors, and it was quite fun and completely the other end of the spectrum. It was like a parallel universe to the work that I had done previously, like working with child combatants versus negotiating deals. It was just like different portals in the same universe.
Well, but was there a thread, at least from a skill set standpoint, meaning were you using negotiating skills in both arenas?
Yeah, definitely. I think my diplomacy skills, my negotiating skills, and my project management skills were transferable. And I was eager enough at the time that I was happy to learn, whatever I needed to learn. But it was a huge change.
So I understand that you pivoted away from working for Audible, and now you started your own business. So talk to us about that.
Yes. So now I have my own business. Between Amazon and where I am now, I worked in marketing for nonprofits and different companies. But I decided to start my own business, and that's where my heart has always been, to be an entrepreneur. And it's been actually, the pandemic really accelerated that process for me, because I focus on Instagram business coaching. So I support primarily female entrepreneurs and business owners in growing their brands on social media and Instagram. And I've been able to replace my 6-figure day job with that. So that's been amazing.
So talk to us about why the gal who was inspired to work at a not-for-profit has always had an entrepreneurial heart, and where are the parallels between someone with an entrepreneurial spirit and someone looking to save the world through the not-for-profit community?
Yeah, it's such a good question, but I feel like, my heart has always been in serving others and motivating and supporting and helping others. And now that's really channeled and focused on specifically helping mothers, since I became a mother 7 years ago. So a lot of the clients and students that I have are moms in business and face a particularly challenging set of obstacles to launching their own businesses and to growing their businesses. So that's where my heart is at. And it's really inspiring for me to see people just become, being able to have that balance of spending time with a family and creating a livelihood as well online.
So now let's walk back to this experience that you had when you were 19. Were you in college at the time, or were you still in high school when you were taking this holiday to Spain that resulted in you having a health crash?
Yeah, so I was in college, and I was dating a British guy at the time. And so we, it was his annual pilgrimage to Mallorca. So it was me and 2 British guys who were, 100% potheads. And I arrived in Mallorca at the airport with a neck brace because I was so determined to go on holiday, but I couldn't move my neck. And I just thought, whatever, it's going to get better. I'm just going to keep popping the Advil and, obviously marijuana is going to help, right? So, but of course it didn't actually help. And it got to the point where I started developing severe headaches, and meningitis-like symptoms where I couldn't eat anymore. I could barely speak. And I didn't know what was going on, right? And I spoke to my mom, and she said that blood tests came back that I had elevated white blood cell counts, but they didn't know what was going on. It wasn't a flu. I had a flu like a month before that happened. And so it got to the point where my mom realized that I couldn't get back on my own. And so she had to fly over to Spain and get me, and basically put me in a wheelchair and get me on a plane. And I just remember, her getting me and putting me into this air-conditioned room, because of course the place I was staying in had like no air conditioning. It was just like, I don't know what it was awful. But I remember being in a room with air conditioning and thinking like, this is amazing. Air conditioning is amazing. Like my head, I couldn't even talk because my head was in so much pain. But I finally arrived in New York City and went straight in the wheelchair to Mount Sinai Hospital. And they ran all sorts of tests on me. I mean, I remember like they had to give me like 4 Valiums to put me in the MRI because I have claustrophobia. So that was fun. And they ran all different diagnostic tests trying to figure out what it was, and they couldn't, infectious disease specialists, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And nobody could figure out what it was. And so their final diagnosis was like, possible viral meningitis, ?
So Masha, what I'm a little confused about is how these symptoms developed to the point where you finally had that crash and you were wheelchair bound and you had to be picked up by your mom. Was it a short window of time between when you first had these sort of neck pains and then you crashed, or were your symptoms developing over time and then you finally had this crash, in part as a result of having this immune disrupting activity where you're living in this, this hellhole, during your holiday and smoking too much pot and doing whatever else you guys are doing? I want to get a handle on how that developed.
Yeah, I mean, I had the flu when I was in New York before I went on holiday, and I thought I had recovered from it. And then, this neck pain started. So it was like a new type of symptom, but I completely ignored it. And I was young and healthy, or thought I was healthy, and just determined to not let that stop me from having a nice holiday in the summertime. So it just went downhill from there, really. And
okay, so let's pause there.
Yeah.
So you have a summer flu.
Mm-hmm.
When you had the summer flu, did you go to see any doctors to be treated for your summer flu when you were in New York?
Yes, I did see a doctor, and they just said to get some rest and drink lots of fluids, and take some Advil if you need it.
So did the New York-based doctor that you were treating with at that time think that, hey, it's summertime and you have a flu, and perhaps this is not the flu, but it could be something else like Lyme disease?
Never. It never even came up. I mean, literally, I'm 42 now, and it's just in the last year that I realized that must be what happened, because it until now, it never even was a possibility. It was just a big, I had meningitis.
Now, when was the last time prior to your summer flu that you recall having been bitten by a tick?
I don't recall. But the thing is that in the summertime, I spent all my time outside, and I used to climb trees. There was a tree where I could see Long Island from the top of the tree. So I'd spend hours in that tree, like climbing the tree, bringing magazines up there, reading books in the tree, so that was, I was bitten all the time. And, when I've been bitten since I've been here in Connecticut, I often don't find the ticks. I don't even see the bites,
Okay, so you're living in the Lyme Belt, you're getting bitten by ticks, you have a summer flu, you see a doctor, the doctor tells you to just get some rest, You now go on your holiday in Spain with the party boys. Your neck is bothering you at that time. You now crash. You come back to New York. You go to Mount Sinai, right? Whole battery of tests are done on you. Did you describe the summer flu to the folks at Mount Sinai, and did you talk to them about how all of your symptoms had developed while they were trying to find a diagnosis?
Yes. Yeah. No, we went through everything, and my mom was there, and they just Lyme disease never even came up. I mean, I remember talking to an infectious disease specialist, and he was asking me all these questions about, did I travel to anywhere in Africa? Could it be parasites? I don't know, whatever. But it was never, the most obvious thing was never, maybe it was discussed amongst the doctors and nurses, but I didn't have that conversation with them.
Just ironically, next week there's going to be a conference held at Mount Sinai on Lyme disease. So I think it's interesting that we have these sort of parallel conversations where, you clearly had Lyme disease and you had classic symptoms that could have been identified by doctors in New York and could have been identified by doctors in Spain, and ultimately could have been identified by doctors at the very hospital that's holding this conference next week. So just ironically, I want to point out to our listeners that that you arrived at a place which is now developing many of the creative tools that are being used to treat people with Lyme disease. So talk to us about how things developed after you left Mount Sinai without a diagnosis.
Yeah, it took me several months to just, I'd lost a lot of weight from not eating for a few weeks, and I was pretty slender to begin with. So it took me a few months to kind of regain my strength and just get back to normal, which I did, I remember just hiking. I mean, like, we used to go hiking all the time as a family and walk in parks, and, the New York area has so many beautiful spots. So who knows, I was probably bitten by ticks right afterwards as well. It's just, I'm like a tick magnet. So then everything seemed to get better. Then, I was in college, the first year of college. So a lot of my college time was a little hazy. But I did my college post grad and then started working in the UK. And it wasn't until I came back to New York in 2006. Yeah, I came back to New York in 2006, and I, realized that I had, to get fit. I wasn't exercising during this entire time. So I got fit. I actually met my current husband, who's a former triathlete and Ironman. And he got me to start working out every day and get really healthy, etc. So he was a huge part in my health journey.
So do you think, Masha, that you were fighting off Lyme all this time because you were eating right, you were exercising, and you had a strong immune system? So it's just a balance of Lyme in your immune system. You feel bad, but then you feel better. You think that was going on for many years before it finally caught up to you?
Yeah, I think that I had issues the whole time, but I was self-medicating. And what happened was that, during college and afterwards, I was, I was drinking, I was smoking pot, I was self-medicating in those ways. And I got sober actually in 2006. And it wasn't until after I got sober and clean and really started prioritizing my health. And, my husband was a huge part of that, helping me really just, understand what was going on, and that I felt what I had to feel. I was just mad. I didn't feel, because I was never completely free of, I was always under the influence of some kind.
So you were essentially numbing what was going on because you weren't feeling well. You were just sort of subconsciously numbing that to get through life.
Exactly. I had no energy. I remember in college trying to go for a run and, go for a jog. And I was just like, I was like dying, and I couldn't. But then, when you're under the influence, then you get energy, you feel better. And so it was like, as soon as, and the UK has a huge drinking culture, right? Our college at Oxford, every college has their own bar, right? You drink with your tutors, your professors, right? You drink during the day. It's hard to describe in the US. It would be so inappropriate here. And also the work culture there, you finish work and you go to the pub with your boss, right? That's part of your job. You have to go to the pub with all your colleagues and you're drinking, and so it was a very unhealthy kind of culture. I'm glad I'm back in the US. But yeah, that was definitely a big part of it, where I, probably had all of these Lyme symptoms that I was just masking.
So now when you meet your husband and you stop drinking and you start to exercise, you said that a lot of these symptoms started to pop up because now you're not masking it, you're not having anything to cover up the symptoms. So what symptoms started to pop back up at this time?
Yeah, so fatigue was a big part, just feeling, exhausted, even when, I'd have a full night's sleep, and just being exhausted all the time and feeling run down, and getting joint pain as well. So it was something that, because he got me on this exercise regimen, it really helped me a lot. Then when I started having, when I got pregnant and I had 2 kids pretty quickly, one after the other, that took a lot out of me. And it wasn't until I crashed, until I stopped breastfeeding my babies, that's when everything kind of, I realized, whoa, something is wrong, really wrong. Like, I shouldn't be feeling this way when I'm only 40 and I am getting a full night's sleep. Why do I feel like I'm 100 years old and I can barely stand up in the morning? So I didn't really notice how I felt until I stopped breastfeeding, basically, because you have these hormones that support you during that time. And there are these, the guys never get them. Like, my husband didn't get the hormones, but the breastfeeding hormones really, they help you deal with not sleeping. They help you continue to want to take care of that baby through like the challenging early times.
So Masha, let's talk about, because he was your boyfriend, then husband, and then you had children, right? And when he was still your boyfriend is when you were starting to exercise and stop drinking. So walk us through your symptom development from the time you were dating up until the time you got married, and how that impacted your life before your children.
Yeah, so that was, during that time, we were living in New York City and we were super active. He doesn't drink at all. He is, triathlete, is super healthy. And so I got into a really healthy lifestyle with him, which was amazing. And I didn't feel, I went to see one naturopath who, convinced me that I had, reactivated Epstein-Barr or whatever. And that's why I was feeling tired and I had brain fog, right? Now I've always been really high functioning. So my brain fog doesn't necessarily seem like brain fog to some other people, but I can tell when it's brain fog if I'm trying to recall something or think of a name or, think of a word or something like that. That's brain fog, right, for me. And that's something, so fatigue and brain fog are probably the 2 main symptoms I had during that time, but exercise and eating well definitely helped.
So when you went to the naturopath, and she told you that you had reactivated Epstein-Barr virus, did you believe her?
It sounded reasonable. All the symptoms are like, fatigue, brain fog, 5,000 other symptoms, right, that sound like Lyme as well, but Lyme never came up, right? So he prescribed, 1 million supplements, etc. He also said, yeah, and you're mildly allergic to, I don't know what it was, like almonds and wheat, right? And like all I was my favorite thing to eat was like an almond croissant. So I was like, that's really, like, I don't like that diagnosis at all. Like, I can't, I'm mildly allergic. What does that mean? If I'm eating an almond croissant, I'm not getting a reaction. Why do I have to stop doing that? So anyway, I definitely started eating healthier. I became really health conscious in terms of how I was eating, and that helped a lot. But yeah, there was never any mention of Lyme. That didn't even come up.
So there was no suggestion of using herbal medicine or any kind of tinctures to address your reactivated Epstein-Barr. It was just lifestyle changes and diet and sleep and things like that, it sounds like.
Exactly. Yeah, stress, and like stress was like the whole thing. But stress like is my parents were divorcing for like 13 years. So like there was always a source of stress from my family side. And so I was like, okay, well, I can manage stress by doing exercise and sleeping well and whatever. But yeah, there was never any mention of treating Lyme.
So now at this point, you think it's just reactive Epstein-Barr virus. You're feeling a little bit better because you're exercising, you're sleeping well, you're eating well. When you get married to your now husband, was there any stress or symptom flare-ups then during that time of having probably high stress and low sleep and planning for your wedding and getting married?
No, no, not really. It was, I was in good health for several years. And I just kind of accepted that, I felt tired at times without any reason, drank a lot of coffee, and that always helped. Probably didn't help, but I thought it helped. Psychologically, it helped. And yeah, so it wasn't really until after I had my kids and finished nursing them that my body, it felt like crashed, like my body had done its duty and given everything to the babies. And I had they were both really big babies. My husband is like 6'6". So, and yeah, it took everything out of me. And that's when I realized, that's when I started crashing and all of the symptoms came up.
So psychologically speaking, Lyme often results in people having anxiety or depression that they didn't have before. Did you ever experience any neurological symptoms or psychological symptoms as a result of Lyme disease?
Well, that's such an interesting question, because I suffered from anxiety and depression since I was a teenager, right? So, which is why I was self-medicating in high school, in college, and during my, early career. And, but I don't know what came first, the chicken or the egg, did I develop depression because of Lyme disease? Did I, or was it, in spite of it, or did it just happen in parallel? But it was definitely a factor, and something that, I was put on all sorts of medications at one point, and that I didn't need. But yeah, that's been a big factor.
And Masha, have you ever gone to a psychologist or a therapist or anybody? Because we've heard a lot of people tell us that surprisingly, their mental health professionals are the ones who first recommend Lyme disease because they see it so much in the mental health community. So did it ever get brought up by any mental health professionals you saw?
That's so interesting. No, never. It never came up. I had pretty dysfunctional family dynamics in my life. So that was always well, obviously that's why you're depressed, so there was never, it was such a clear causal relationship. So, that never even came up, and I had never even thought of that connection, to be honest, until just now.
So, you mentioned to Rich earlier, you did a lot of work with people, specifically females, and now you're doing work today with females as well in the Instagram community. Do you think, looking back at your history, that your diagnosis was delayed because you were, I guess, number one, a woman, and then number two, a mom, right? And then number three, going through some stressors in your life that everybody said, oh, she's just got a ton of stuff going on in her life, so she's just stressed and depressed and anxious. Oh, she's just a mom, so all those symptoms she's experiencing is because she's a mom who's not sleeping well, and of course you're not feeling well. Do you think a lot of that contributed to your delayed diagnosis with Lyme disease?
Oh, 100%. I mean, so what happened was, last year, in 2020, and the year before that, 2019 and 2020, my daughter is 5. I stopped nursing her when she was 3. And as soon as I stopped nursing her and those feel-good hormones went away and I could feel my body, it was like, whoa, what's going on here? This does not feel normal, right? I went to my GP, I went to another GP, I went to a PA, and I told them, I'm like, I'm not feeling well. My babies are sleeping through the night. I have no reason not to feel like this. And they're like, well, you're a working mom, and of course you're run down and you're fatigued, and that's normal. And I had one doctor here in Lyme, Central Connecticut, one doctor who actually said, you just need to work out an hour a day, 5 days a week for a month, and then come back and see how you feel. And I just laughed at him. I just laughed because I felt so dismissed. And I, you know, as a working mother of 2 little kids, and I was commuting an hour each way for my job, you know, I couldn't even shower every day. So the idea that like, you know, I'd have to like, of course I know exercise is good, right? That's so patronizing. And I live with, you know, this super human athlete, you know, like his number one solution is always exercise. So, but it was such and I told him, I said to this doctor, I said, can you check me for Lyme? I live in the woods, like we live in a tree house in the forest. Can you please check me for Lyme? They did the Lyme tests and nothing, right? They just do that screening test. I always come up negative every single
It was just the ELISA, not the Western blot they did, right? The screening.
Exactly. Okay. Yeah. And so then I said, you know what? This is just not right. The GPs are not getting it. I need to go to a specialist. So I was on the hunt. I was determined. I was like, I can figure this out. I'm smart. I'm just going to like track my symptoms and go to one specialist after another. So I said, okay, well, I've got joint pain. I'm going to go to the rheumatologist, right? My sister-in-law has fibromyalgia and rheumatoid arthritis. Those symptoms are very similar to Lyme symptoms. Why don't I go there and find out and at least rule out that this is not an autoimmune situation? And when I went to the rheumatologist, who was lovely, and you know, and my fingers were swelling up, by the way, I didn't mention that, like the joint symptoms that I was feeling was, you know, I felt like I was 100 years old, like all my bones were hurting. I could barely open the fridge at one point. I was showing my husband, I'm like, look, I'm not making it up. My finger is ginormous. Look at this. This is not right. Something's going on. You know, so I'd have these migratory joint pains, right? Such a classic Lyme symptom. And every doctor I'd go to, I'd be like, are you sure it's not Lyme? Because I'm in a forest. No. So again, the rheumatologist checked me for Lyme, and so I came negative again. And I said, isn't there another test? Can't you do like the next level? Like I didn't know what it was called, right? The Western blot. And they said, no, you don't need that. But we did all these rheumatoid arthritis tests. Then he was convinced I had fibromyalgia, and because of the joint pain. So he put me on this nerve pain medication, which literally made me suicidal within 5 days, right? I have a history of depression and anxiety, and I should have never been put on that medication. I became so unbearable. My husband was like, what is going on? Like, who are you? Like, you're, you know, and I was severely depressed. Within 5 days, it was like, and I looked at that medication, I read the side effect, and I'm like, hold on a second, I shouldn't even be taking this. Like, not only is the pain not getting better, I'm crying all day long. Like, this can't be right. Something is wrong. So I went off it, and I told him, I'm like, I don't think I have fibromyalgia. I really think I have Lyme disease. And he's like, well, why don't you come in again? And we're going to do another round of testing. So then he says, okay, I think you have seronegative rheumatoid arthritis, right? Which is like you test negative. So, and just based on my clinical, symptoms. And the whole time I had this gut feeling that it was Lyme, but I just couldn't. So then I realized, okay, he wanted to put me on this biologic drug, which is like a low-level chemotherapy, basically, for rheumatoid arthritis symptoms. And I'm like, nobody in my family has autoimmune issues. Are you really sure this is that? I mean, I was happy. I wanted a diagnosis so badly that I was like, I almost embraced it. I was like, yes, well, I have rheumatoid arthritis. Okay, early onset old lady disease. Great. Like, that's it. Now I know what I have, and now I can treat it, and yay, whatever. Just like not knowing, I think, is the most torturous part of it, that knowing that something is wrong, but also I look healthy, right? I do not look sick, right? So when you tell doctors you're not feeling well and you look well, and you're functioning, high functioning, right? It's really, it's so frustrating. So I never took that biologic drug. I decided, I'm like, this is not it. I just listened to my gut, and I found a Lyme literate physician, because I said, how can this be that in Connecticut, like all these doctors don't know about Lyme? This is so bizarre. And I ended up going with a naturopathic doctor who didn't take insurance, of course, right? Everything out of pocket. And I finally just bit the bullet because I was like, I need to know what's happening. And so I started seeing her.
Masha, before we go down that road, let's talk about the medication you got for the fibromyalgia. What was that nerve medication that made you suicidal and didn't help you at all?
I can't remember the name of it. Yeah, I don't know what it was. I'd have to look it up.
And again, you're living in Connecticut where the Lyme was discovered. You keep saying, I think I have Lyme disease. You're exhibiting all of the classic symptoms of Lyme. They won't give you anything beyond the screening for Lyme disease, which we know is horribly inaccurate. Nobody would run a Western blot from your general doctor all the way through to your rheumatologist, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
And then they wanted to put you on a low level of chemo to treat rheumatoid arthritis rather than exploring Lyme disease.
Yeah. I mean, he just, because he just wasn't trained in it. So he was trained in rheumatology and all of those illnesses. And that's the missing link. I realized that, there's something missing. Like the doctors are just not learning about this in medical school. They're not being trained for it. And certainly the GPs are dismissing it altogether, right? Or at least the GPs that I ended up seeing, because, they checked my thyroid level. It's something to do with my thyroid. When I was still nursing, forget it. When I was still nursing, it was like, oh, well, you're of course you're nursing a baby, you have little children, they're keeping you up at night. So of course you don't feel well. That's normal, right? That's normal. But then when I stopped nursing and I'm like, my kids are sleeping through the night now what's the excuse? Like, now what's the reason? Like, why is my Achilles heel killing me when I shuffle out of bed in the morning? That doesn't make sense.
So Masha, were there other symptoms? So obviously you were having trouble even getting out of bed and walking, but beyond the arthritis and beyond the fatigue and beyond the brain fog, were there any other symptoms that popped up when you had this crash after you stopped nursing?
No. So those were the main symptoms: brain fog, fatigue, and migratory joint pain. So
you now pivot over to this Lyme specialist who's a naturopath in Connecticut. So walk us through what that was like finally after seeing your primary care doctor and your rheumatologist who totally dismissed the idea of Lyme disease.
Yeah, so that was, it was money well spent, I would say, because, I pushed it off. I procrastinated on seeing her for over a year because I just didn't want to spend the money. Like the first initial assessment was, I don't know, a lot. And I just thought, I can spend this on other things for the kids. I don't need to do this. Then I finally got to the point where, okay, I need help and I'm not getting answers anywhere else that insurance does cover. So I'm going to go with it. And she did like a full blood analysis. And I remember my husband was with me when we had the telehealth visit. And she said, okay, you have an active Lyme infection, like right now. You have walking pneumonia. And there was like a host of other issues. And I was like, what? She's like, I don't even know how you're functioning. I'm like, I don't know, coffee, like willpower, just mom guilt. It was crazy. It was such a relief to see, the actual results were in my blood all along. I mean, I don't know how I got the pneumonia, to be honest. That was a whole other thing. Yeah, the fact that I had an active, and she said, and you have chronic Lyme, you have had Lyme in the past, no surprise, right? So she's like, okay, well, the first thing we need to do is treat your active infection. So she can prescribe antibiotics because she's an ND. So I was like, okay, well, at least I know what I have. So now I'm going to go to my GP and get the antibiotics. So I went on 2 months of antibiotics. And it was a complete game changer. It was like within 4 days, I started feeling better.
So Masha, before we go into more detail about the antibiotics, I do want to back up and ask you a question about your naturopath. So you mentioned you did a telehealth. So did you do lab work in advance and then go over the results with the naturopath, or is this a clinical diagnosis made over the phone based on your symptoms?
No, so I saw her in person, and it was just the telehealth visit was to review the results of the tests. So I had, a physical exam and blood draw and everything.
And with that blood work, did she do the Western blot in addition to the ELISA as well?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And I'm curious, did she test for any co-infections, like any other tick-borne disease panels?
She did. She's a Lyme specialist, a Lyme and autoimmune disease specialist, which is why I went to her, and she focuses on women and Lyme. So yes, she tested for all the co-infections, etc., and just came up for Lyme basically.
So if people are listening and they want to learn more, possibly see your doctor, are you comfortable sharing her name, or can they DM you if they're interested in trying to find a doctor who specializes in Lyme and autoimmune? Because they go together hand in hand so often, and people struggle to find a competent doctor to help treat them.
Yes, so I would say DM me, because there's kind of more to the story. Like, I'm not seeing her now for a reason, so I don't want to say her name. But she definitely was an important part of my journey, and she helped me get a diagnosis. And yeah, you can just DM me at Masha Goins. You can find me on Instagram. I'm there. Yeah, so that, having that clarity, it was just a shock kind of to me. I'm like, this was in my blood all the time, and I actually had an active infection. Of course, I don't remember. I didn't see a tick on me. I mean, I have, since we've moved here, I have found ticks on me. I have found numerous ticks on my children, on their head, in their ears, on their belly. I mean, that is the most upsetting thing when you have, when you find a tick on your little girl. And I mean, I've got like the special tweezers. I have the little things. I take them right to the lab. Town hall here submits them for testing. I'm on that, but it's so upsetting, especially when you don't find it right away, when it's been on them for a day. That's the worst part of it. But anyway, I digress.
So Masha, we're going to put your contact info in the show notes of this podcast episode. And are you comfortable sharing with us? You mentioned that you no longer see this doctor for some reasons. Is that something that you're not comfortable sharing? Or can you share with the audience what that reason is?
Yeah, no, I'm happy to share that. I mean, I feel like what helped me was the clarity of my diagnosis and knowing what I needed to do. And then going on 2 months of antibiotics was a complete game changer. It helped me a lot. So all of the migratory joint pains, all of that went away. My fatigue and brain fog improved, but did not go away. But the joint pain was a huge part of it, right? And that really did go away. And then she put me on this herbal protocol. I think it's called Cowden protocol, for months, right? And I mean, that thing is like if you're a busy parent and you have to do like 15 drops of this and like two, 3 times a day. I mean, my head was like exploding from trying to keep up with what I needed to do at what time, and then take like 5,000 different supplements, which are all, really expensive as well. So I said, that's okay. I'm going to do that. I'm going to go on. I'm going to do exactly what she says. I'm going to do exactly what she says. She said, go on an alkaline diet. Okay. Now, I was already eating super healthy. I'm a pescatarian. I haven't had a sip of alcohol since 2005. I am, like, my biggest vice is having my oat milk latte in the morning. Like, I have 1 shot of coffee in the morning. That is like as bad as it gets these days. And so going alkaline was an extreme version of what I was already doing, but it meant that like my eating was really constricted, really reduced. And it made it very complicated because I had to prepare dinner for my husband, one thing, right? 6'6", like he can't just eat kale, like he cannot, like he needs more, and then my kids, right? They're not going to eat all the leafy green vegetables. They eat pretty healthy, but so it just complicated my life a lot. But I was determined. I'm like, I'm going to keep going. I'm going to do this. But it was not sustainable, right? Like that restrictive diet is not sustainable. And the other thing is the supplements were not sustainable as well. So I didn't feel like I got any better after, like, that initial antibiotics helped me get better. The other stuff, I don't feel that it helped me get better. It just really complicated my life.
So just to be clear, Masha, the alkaline diet and the Cowden herbal protocol did not help you feel better. But earlier on, when you first started the antibiotics for 2 months, within the first few weeks, you felt much better, specifically in the area of your arthritis, but not your brain fog or your fatigue, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So when you mentioned that the treatment was the antibiotics and the Cowden protocol, was this a treatment protocol recommended by your naturopath, and you had to use your primary care doctor for the antibiotics because you needed a prescription, or were you now treating primarily with your primary care physician for the antibiotics and the herbs?
Yeah, so I was primarily treating with a naturopathic doctor, and she had a friend who was an MD who would prescribe antibiotics. So that's how it happened. I had follow-up consultations, etc. And I just, after a few months, I just realized that that was as good as it gets with that relationship. Like there was no other treatment. It was just every visit that I then had subsequently was, let me add another supplement. Okay, let me add another supplement. And I was just getting tired of having to, purchase and consume so many different supplements that I felt like, I've always been a fan of supplements, but I just felt like they weren't moving the needle. And the Cowden protocol, I did that for months. And so I finally got to a point where I'm like, I don't think I need to continue seeing her because it's not helping me. But before I get to that point, I have to tell you that last winter, I started feeling worse again. So even though I was on the Cowden protocol, I was doing all of this healthy eating, supplements up the wazoo, and I started getting all of the Lyme, the joint pain again. And I told her, I said, I feel like I've been bitten again. I know, like, this sounds crazy. You're gonna think I'm nuts, but like I literally, and it was the winter time, but we were hiking. It was like pandemic winter, right? Like family activity. We're like, there's nothing we can do. Let's go hiking together. And I did not strip off all my clothes after hiking or run and take a shower, right? Like I'm running after the kids, then something else happens, you forget about it. I always do the tick checks for them, but I wasn't being that fastidious for myself. So I said, I want to get tested again. Let me get tested again. And lo and behold, I got tested again. And she was like, you're right. You have been reinfected. You have another active infection. I was like, wow, great. I can just literally step outside and a tick is going to like drop on my head. I don't understand. How is this happening? Like even in the winter time, but the thing is that I felt it. I knew that something was going on. And again, she said, okay, well, and I said, look, supposedly I'm on this Cowden protocol, which is supposed to be like these herbs are more powerful than antibiotics. And yet I'm not feeling that, right? They're not helping me. Like I got the active infection and they're not helping me. So, and she's like, yeah, I think you need to go on antibiotics again. I'm like, okay. So now at this point I said, okay, I'm not going to go with antibiotics with your friend. I'm just going to talk to my GP, and my GP put me on antibiotics. And again, I felt better after the antibiotics.
Was this another 2-month window of antibiotics?
No, this was just 4 weeks.
4 weeks. Okay. So I do want to go back to the Cowden protocol because we've had people that have talked to us about the Cowden protocol on this podcast, and all of them have said the same thing, pretty much exactly what you're saying, that it is extremely overwhelming because it becomes a full-time job just to take your medicine pretty much all day long, at random points throughout the day. And it was very stressful and they didn't feel much better. So I wonder if the stress and anxiety that comes along with it, is that, do you think, suppressing your immune system because you're anxious, you're stressed, and now it's actually making you feel worse because there's so much involved in this protocol?
I mean, I don't think so, because I was very positive about it. Initially, I was like, yeah, these herbs from the rainforest, they're going to be great. And this is going to like kill all the little spirally bacteria in my blood. Fantastic. Like I'm going to, I had my sheet printed out in the kitchen. Like I knew exactly I was on it. But I just wasn't seeing the results with it, so that I think is when you get the frustration that, okay, I'm taking this, but really the one thing that moved the needle for me. And I know that this is not the case for everyone with Lyme. Some people take the antibiotics and they don't feel better at all. But in my case, that was the needle mover.
So you really went into this with game on, this is going to work. These herbs are going to kill the bacteria, and it still didn't work. So it wasn't even a mindset piece or a stress piece. This was really just, they didn't work for you.
Right. And the interesting thing is, like, if, you know, during my treatment was bitten, right? So while I was on the Cowden protocol, I actually was bitten by a tick and had a new active infection. And it did not seem to be working. So there's some kind of disconnect. I don't know where the disconnect is, but whether it's just me, but it did not do anything. And then, and so that was like frustrating to me, because I had invested a lot of time, money, and you know, I think it's the mental load of it that is so frustrating, you know, because especially when you're a busy parent, you know, you have the emotional mental load. There's like a million things you have to keep track of. And so doing something that doesn't seem to be helping is not really, you know, it's frustrating.
It's definitely not just you. We've been told by a lot of other people that the Cowden protocol hasn't been for them either. But I'm curious, so today, how are you feeling? So for example, you mentioned your brain fog and your fatigue was improved a little bit, but not so much. Are you still experiencing brain fog and fatigue today, or has that gotten better as well?
So I have had improvements in fatigue and brain fog, but I still have them. And certain times of the month, I'll feel worse, like the week before my period is due. I tend to feel worse. And I know that there's a Lyme and hormone connection, that, you know, I don't know what the connection is, but it has something to do with estrogen. And I think that that's why you get these like flare-ups of symptoms during those times. And the other thing I didn't mention is that 3 years ago, when I started, like, my body was crashing after I stopped nursing, I started getting sinus infections, or what I thought were sinus infections. And this was like the missing piece. Speaking of brain fog, I forgot to tell you how I even found out about Lyme, was because I was getting what I thought were sinus infections. And I went to the ENT. I went to the GP, and the GP prescribed antibiotics, and it wasn't helping. So then I went to the ENT, and they did like that sinus, you know, they put the probe up into your brain or whatever. Very pleasant experience. And the guy's like, you don't have a sinus infection. You have severe inflammation. And I'm like, what? He's like, I think you must have severe environmental allergies. I'm like, oh, no, I don't have allergies. Like, I'm not an allergy person. Like, that's not me. And he's like, no, you need to see an allergist. So then I went to an allergist, and I did all the, you know, tests. And it turns out I was severely allergic to all sorts of things suddenly, right? I wasn't before. All the pollen, like all the trees. And again, we live like surrounded by trees, all the grasses, dust, of course, you know, cats. I've always known that I was allergic to cats. That's like the one thing that I've known throughout my life. Dust and cats, I'm a little allergic to, right? But it wasn't until recently that I became severely allergic to everything. And there's a huge connection between the basically inflammatory autoimmune response that allergies create in your body and the Lyme. So I started treating the allergies with, I'm seeing an amazing allergist, Dr. Lewin, who I highly recommend. He's in Norwalk, Connecticut, as well as New York City. And he prescribes sublingual drops, like autoimmune therapy. So instead of, I know some people get these allergy shots, but they don't really work. These autoimmune drops, they, you know, give you a little bit of what you're allergic to, and they build up your immune system over time. So I have been tackling that in the last 3 years, and I'm on year 3 of like a 5-year plan, basically. But I think that there has been so much like connection between my allergies and the Lyme symptoms.
Now, is that called antigen therapy that you're getting under your tongue?
It's called immunotherapy.
Immunotherapy. So as you pointed out, I think this is very common for people that when they like I had allergies my whole life as well, and they were minor. But then when I got sick with Lyme disease, my allergies were off the charts and so much more severe. I think because you're suffering from autoimmune inflammation from your allergies, then you're suffering from inflammation due to the Lyme bacteria itself. And together, your allergy symptoms get even worse and your body becomes more inflamed. So I'm curious, Masha, you said you've been on this now for a little bit of time. Have you found, now that you've been able to treat Lyme twice with antibiotics, and you're also working on your allergies with these drops under your tongue, are your allergies getting better?
Yes, they're definitely getting better. I don't get like any sinus infections or anything like that anymore. And I'm still, taking allergy medication every day. But I think that, whenever, like now in the fall, there's like the ragweed season, I had no idea that that was even a thing, like I was living in New York City, like what is ragweed? I don't even know, but apparently it's everywhere, it's all over our property. I'm like allergic to everything. So yeah, I think that treating my allergy is going to be the missing link to finally getting rid of the rest of the Lyme symptoms, because of that connected, autoimmune response.
So really, it was two different sources contributing to your inflammation, which is making it unbearable. And you're now able to address both, which is allowing your body to sort of take a breath and feel better, I think is what you're saying.
Yes, exactly.
So talk to us about things that you've learned throughout your journey. So just things that you've intuitively been able to identify. You mentioned that you're just a really clean eater, that you exercise when you can, and you do things like that. But have there been any food triggers for you that have made your Lyme symptoms worse or given you a Lyme flare?
So yes, actually, when I was seeing that rheumatologist initially, when, he thought it was fibromyalgia, and then he said it was rheumatoid arthritis. And he mentioned, he's like, well, some of my patients, get relief by going on a gluten-free diet. Like he said that as an aside, not like I recommend you go on one, but some of them do it on their own. And I had been gluten-free-ish for several years before that for health, just for healthy eating reasons. Ever since that naturopath had said, oh, you're mildly allergic to wheat or whatever. So I said, okay, you know what? I'm just going to go gluten-free 100%. Because I was like half ASSing it, right? I was like, like a really good looking cookie came my way, and then I was not gluten-free, but then the rest of the week I'd be gluten-free, right? But then I was like, okay, I'm going to do 100% gluten-free. There's like everything is gluten-free now. This should not be difficult, right? And so, yeah, I've been gluten-free, and I have recently been almost completely dairy-free. And I think that has helped a lot as well.
So before I hand you back over to Rich, Masha, is there anything that you've learned throughout your journey that you want to share with our audience, whether it's a tip or a trick or an observation or something that you've had to stumble upon that you wish you knew earlier on in your journey?
Yes, the number one thing is to realize that you know your body better than anybody else, and only you know how you feel inside your body, and you have to be your number one advocate. If you just passively give up your power to a physician and accept their misdiagnosis, etc., you can be completely stuck. Like you have to be the detective, and you have to treat it like the most important job in the world, because you're not going to get better and you're going to get stuck in a misdiagnosis. Or, I tell people, like a lot of people come to me on social media, actually, they find me and they're like, wow, I'm having some of these symptoms. And I'm like, get tested, but don't just do that screening test, because you are probably going to come up negative. And then the whole, that's how it all starts for a lot of people. So really being that detective for yourself and trusting your intuition, and continuing to, and not getting comfortable. Like even I found a naturopathic doctor, she helped me, but now she's not helping me anymore. Like now I need the next thing, So it's taking that power to yourself and taking it back for yourself, for your own healing.
Masha, I have a question before I talk to you about your transformation, about you being a tick magnet. I've actually been accused of being a tick magnet, even by some of the folks on our social media. And my argument in response to that is that I'm not a tick magnet, I'm a tick checker. I do often find ticks on me, but I grew up in a tick endemic community. I've always checked for ticks since my childhood. And because of that, I find ticks on me. So do you think that there's something unique about you that's attracting you to ticks, or are you just somebody who is aware because this has been a part of your life since your childhood, and because of that awareness and because you're checking, you're just finding them?
I suspect that there is something that makes me, whether it's my scent or my blood, that makes me attractive to ticks. 100%. I'm the person who, if nobody else is getting a mosquito bite, is going to be riddled with mosquito bites. Like they're going to hone in on me like, heat-seeking missiles. So there's definitely something there. I don't know what it is. I'm not a scientist, but if I was one, I'd be like, okay, I'm going to study this, because it obviously has, it just can't be like, it can't be that you, otherwise it doesn't make rational sense.
So perhaps like you, I am really a tick magnet, and it's not just my tick checking skills that's causing me to find them, but I am in fact, having both mosquitoes, which often bite me as well, and ticks finding me. So we're gonna have to spend more time thinking about that and exploring that in the future. But I do want to now talk to you about the beauty of this journey, and how this journey with Lyme disease has been transformational in your life and allowed you to learn about yourself, learn things about yourself that you would not have learned had you not gone through the suffering that Lyme disease has caused you.
Yeah, I mean, what it's helped me learn is that, understanding like your most important relationship is with yourself, and that journey, it's been a journey of radical self-love, to be honest, because instead of just seeing your body as like something that gets you through the day, it's really honoring your body and seeing, how you can help it heal holistically. And so that's been a big part of it. And, I know that when I went through this whole childbirthing and nursing and all of that, that was a huge stress on my body. Like I gave everything, like to my little ones. And I don't regret doing that. But as a result, I was very depleted. So I don't think there's that connection. We don't really understand like how can maybe mothers who are going into that, like how can they be supported? Because I know that for a lot of women who are going that's when a lot of other things fall apart as well. But then it's like, oh, well, that's just part of it.
So we're going to pull these two things together, because at the end of Matt's portion of his conversation with you, you talked about listening to your body and the signals that your body's giving you, and how you have to honor that primarily if you're going to be successful in your journey. But now you're also talking about this radical self-love and the importance of taking care of a body that is a powerful tool. So can you bring those two together for us and talk to us about how you connected the lessons and the signals that your body was giving to you, and how that helped you to heal your body?
Yeah, I think that, we are so used to, after years of numbing the things that you feel in your mind, whether it's depression, anxiety, sadness, or self-doubt or anything like that, instead of, numbing, instead of like, I'm feeling like this, so I'm going to reach for, the chocolate bar, or I'm going to have a drink, or I'm going to do whatever is going to help me feel better. It's really like being in that moment and trying to actually become aware of what you're feeling, because there's this big rush. Like our whole society is all about, numbing ourselves, whether it's, whether it's consumption as well, right? There are other forms of addiction and consumption and online shopping and, filling up our houses with all this CRAP that we don't need, right? So it's about kind of going more inwards and realizing like, what do you actually need, right? You need this thing this house that you're in, you need it to work. Like that is the number one thing. Everything else is like secondary, because nothing else works if it doesn't.
And to make that house that you're in work, you have to listen to that house, right? And that's the sort of the parallels that you were developing. So let's talk about your professional transformation, because as you've been on this Lyme disease journey, you've also gone through a professional transformation where you found a different home professionally as well. And I want to explore the entrepreneurial spirit that you now have, and how you believe that your Lyme journey has helped you to get to the place where you needed to be, where you can serve as an entrepreneur rather than initially as a not-for-profit employee.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was all about being true to myself and finding my purpose in life, and that is all about coming home in another way, right? So that's where I am now, and I'm finding my purpose. It's like I know that I'm doing the thing that I should be doing, and it's an exciting journey. So it's, again, as an entrepreneur, you have to create boundaries though, because it's not like you just clock in, you clock out, right? It can be all consuming. If you have workaholic tendencies, you can be all consuming. But I set very clear boundaries for myself, so that I can be that mom when my kids come off the bus, that I can bake cookies with them, that we can do stuff, that I'm present with them, that I'm not glued to my phone. And the fact is that the more successful I am on social media, the less time I spend on social media, because it is an addiction, right? So I think that, the entrepreneurial journey is not easy, but for me is the way to go.
So now talk about the entrepreneurial business that you've developed, right? You are now a mom-to-mom trainer, where you're training people to use to develop their businesses on Instagram. So talk about how Lyme disease, which ultimately caused you to come home, be at peace with who you are, listen to your body, listen to these signals, which then took you from working at a large place like Amazon to a small business that you started yourself, which required you to not only place limits on yourself physically and emotionally, but also now place limits on yourself professionally, which is now causing you to have even greater results than you had before. So talk about how that journey developed for you.
Yeah, and I think that the pandemic actually had a big part in it, because when everything kind of came to a head, and it was all so crazy, and like the kids were home, and suddenly my husband and I were both working full time and having to homeschool. And it was just absolutely stressful and insane. And at that time, I was working in marketing and communications for a church, for a nonprofit, and it was it became a very toxic work environment. And I realized, like, what the pandemic showed us is, like, what really matters. What do you want to do with your life, right? When it all boils down to it. And I'm like, you know what? That's not what I want to do. Like, what I want to do is not be in a toxic work environment. I want to be in a healthy work environment. I want to follow my passions. I don't want to put up with things that I don't think are correct, or I don't want to, do something that I don't believe in. And so it all kind of came together, I think, honoring my body and honoring sort of my mind and my soul.
So let's talk about the skills that you had developed before you became a mom and you met your husband. And you were working in the not-for-profit world. You were actually working in war-torn societies, and you were helping women in war-torn societies. And then you are now working with women who need to find balance and can make that work-life balance. And you're actually training them how to use Instagram in a way that will be beneficial to them without having to post too often. So show us how that arc has come together for you, and how going on this Lyme disease journey helped you to do that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, I was always about, like, what drove me was always to serve others and to help others and to connect with them and inspire them. And now through Instagram, I found a way of actually practically helping female entrepreneurs build their businesses in a way that is sustainable, and in a way that doesn't require you being on social media all the time, because there is such a dark side to that, right? There's a big dark side to Instagram, as we know, and to Facebook, etc. And so how can you make it work for your brand without being glued to your phone, right? How can you actually build a successful business with a small audience, right? These are things that seem really impossible to do and really complicated. And I know I have a method to do them. So I am, like, on a mission to help others do that, because it's a game changer once you do.
So now I want to ask you the final question we ask everyone on the Tick Boot Camp. And because you have two daughters, I'm going to ask you about both of them. Let's say, God forbid, the two of your daughters are playing outside. Well, you were kind enough to take time out to share your journey with our listeners. And they came into your room after you finished the podcast, and you conducted the tick check that you always do, and you found ticks on your children. What would you do with the ticks and your children to make sure your children wouldn't suffer from chronic Lyme disease?
Okay, so what I do is, because sadly this happens, and actually we started spraying our yard this year, so it's been happening less often. But we weren't spraying our yard. I was like against spraying the yard. I don't know what. Like that must have been the brain fog. What was I thinking? I should have sprayed the yard from the very beginning. But what I do is I have little vials. Our town hall actually health department gives these little tick kits, right? They come little vials. So I'm like a little scientist. I have these special tweezers to pull them out. I put them in the vials. As much as I want to, like, crush them and torture them in horrible ways, I don't do that. I just put them in the vials. I seal the vials. I bring them to town hall. They submit them to the Connecticut whatever research center where they test them. I give them all the information, and then I find out like which ticks are positive for what. And then I monitor my kids for symptoms. I look for the rash. I look for fevers. I look for any joint, achiness. And most recently, I have been giving my daughters like a 24-hour antibiotic dose. I'm just requesting it from the doctor. They're like, no symptoms, they're fine. And I'm like, okay, I just want to put her on 24 hours of antibiotics. Like, it's not going to harm her, but it could help, like if anything was transmitted. Because the problem is that the scientists at the lab, when I talk to them, they're like, oh yeah, they can start transmitting within 15 minutes of being attached to you. Okay. The doctors are like, it's got to be at least 24 hours, right? There's a big difference like between those two. Like, so but I don't know that they know exactly when it happens, right? It's something between the two. But the fact is, if it's been on you for several hours, who knows, right? So knock on wood, so far my girls have been good, but I'm on it like a hawk.
Thank you for listening to the Tick Boot Camp interview with our guest, Masha Goins. To our listeners, we have a call to action. First, if you'd like to learn more about Masha Goins, please visit our Instagram page at Masha Goins. Second, if you enjoyed this episode of the Tick Boot Camp podcast, please share it with your friends by using the social media buttons you see at the bottom of our post. Third, Tick Boot Camp has created a Tick Bite Blueprint that has been inspired by the information that has been shared with us by past podcast guests. We urge you to visit our website at tickbootcamp.com to view the blueprint. Please note we would appreciate any input or any improvements you would like to share with us. Fourth, don't forget to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, or Spotify to get your automatic episode updates of our Tick Boot Camp podcast. And finally, we thank you, our community, for your comments on our past podcast episodes. Please take a minute to leave us an honest review on Apple Podcasts or on Instagram or on our website. We make it a point to read every single one of the reviews we get. Thank you, as always, for listening.